On March 30th, the first phase of operations of the special military operation ended in Ukraine, according to Russian Ministry of Defense. And forces were pulled out from Kiev so as to be regrouped in the Donbas area. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that the attack on Kiev was a feint, and there's every reason to believe that what they're saying are true. It's now being confirmed that in the battle around Kiev, there was really only 40,000 Ukrainian and 40,000 Russian forces around Kiev that have put Kiev in a siege. And so that will align fully well with the fact that it was a feint, because a city of 3 million, you're not going to storm it with 40,000 troops. Especially so because Ukraine had around maybe about 200,000 or so troops in Kiev trying to defend Kiev. So let's get in there. Let's do a recap of how things went in the first phase, and then do some analysis on it, and then look at what could happen going forward. Right? Now, this is the Upriver Crawfish channel. I'm your host, Sankara, and this is Talking Guns. So let's begin with day one, how activities went down. I would say ignore this part here because it was Ukraine and Western media confusion or hysterics that mentioned that Russian forces had landed at Odessa. That didn't happen. So this was what you call classic maneuver warfare. So, and there's a correction I need to make as well. I think a while back I said that Russia was using only 15 to 30% of the assembled force. What actually that report was, they were using 15 to 30% of their force, but of the overall Russian force, that's what they meant. So around some 200,000 troops totally were the ones were slotted for this operation. So Ukraine is, everybody tend, if you go by Western media, the nonsense Western media is saying, you're going to believe that Ukraine is this. The battle between Ukraine and Russia is some Goliath, David versus Goliath thing. Not true. Ukraine is by manpower the third largest military in Europe. If you consider that Turkey is in Europe and Russia is in Europe, then you will go with Russia, Turkey, and then Ukraine. Ukraine has a military, a standing military, meaning active military, of around 265,000 men. But they also have a reserve that's anywhere between 200, another 230,000 men to around 300,000 men, if depending on what source you go to. Furthermore, they activated around about another 100,000 people who they call, I think, the territorial defense. So you put their force composition of around especially since they're defending their home, you'll put them around 600,000. So the Russians, knowing that, knew that in order to be able to defeat that larger force, they would use maneuver warfare to be able to defeat that amount of force. And so maneuver warfare and defeat in detail, something they call defeat in detail. I will explain defeat in detail to you later on. Right? So maneuver warfare was how they started the war in the first phase. So the airborne dropped the VDV into Kiev at Gostomel airport, which was about 18 miles from the center of Kiev. That was on day one. That force at Gostomel stayed there for 24 hours until forces from Belarus came into Ukraine via Chernobyl. They seized Chernobyl, and then they came down to Kiev and deblocked that unit at Gostomel airport. From the south, Ukraine did two things. They came through from Crimea and created a diversion which went west towards Kherson. And then the main force went west towards the Donbas area and towards Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye. From Mykolaev, Russian forces came in to back up the separatists, and the separatist forces were doing what you would call a fixing movement. So if you understand the hammer and the anvil metaphor, the you're trying to hammer something. You put it on an anvil, and then you hammer it. So the separatist forces were acting as the fixing force or the anvil for the Russian hammer to come and encircle the forces that were in this area. Then also another diversion came, or I would say a fixing force came from north from Belgorod towards Kharkov. They also blocked troops from moving from Kharkov down into the Donbas area and kept them in this area fighting to defend Kharkov. They also came down in the Sumy region and did the same thing. These forces from the Sumy region together with forces from Chernigov came and put pressure on Kiev from the east. All right. So let me show you another map. So if you look at this map, right, the forces came. One group of force came from in this direction from Crimea, went towards Kherson, and they actually went towards Mykolaev. They are a diversionary force so that they keep all Ukrainian forces on the side in check and block from going towards the Donbas area. The next force moved over to the Donbas on the east side, pushing towards Zaporozhye and putting the pressure on Mariupol, which was in the Donbas region. The Donbas forces here acted as the fixing force, or in this map, someone put here a pinning force, so that to keep the Ukrainian forces here encircled. As of now, it has been stated that it is actually 80,000 men that is in this squadron. Now, this squadron hasn't totally closed yet. It hasn't totally closed yet. But they can move. Especially they can move in a coordinated fashion. They can't move large columns, because they will be hit. So they almost stuck there. That's where the battle later on is going to come. So now and then these forces that came down blocked um, Kharkov. Actually, they have blocked Kharkov on three sides, not the south. So Kharkov still fighting, but they are blocked it on the south, on the southeast, so that they can't move forces down. They wouldn't have wanted to move forces down even if they could, because that then would have give opportunity for Kharkov to be seized. They then so you had here an operational pause. I think day one, day two, or day three, there was an operational pause in a Kiev area. Now, Western media was putting that as, oh, it's because Ukrainian was doing fierce fighting. No, there was not much of a fighting, especially not in the first few days. Later times there were some fighting, but really the Ukrainians weren't putting up much of a fight, to be frank. Let me show another map. So this map was actually on day two, no, day three, because on the 24th, 25th, and 26th. So it was February 26th. This map came from February 26th. So if you take a look here, the Ukrainian forces are in here, some forces are in there, and then there are forces in Mariupol. Based on the pressure that the Russians were putting towards Mariupol, the good thing would have been for these forces in Mariupol to pull out. There were some 15,000 men. Apparently 7,000 of them were the Nazis. It would have been a good thing for them to pull out, but they did not pull out. Now, that's not a good operational move. So, these forces kept the rest of the 80,000 Ukrainian forces, which are the strongest fighting men of the Ukrainian forces, the most ready forces. These separatists kept them here in check. This diversion here, so this here is a fixing movement, because these forces fighting to push here, these guys have to fight back, so they are fixed. That's what we call a fixing movement. They are fixed until they decide to pull back. At some point in time, at the beginning of the battle, seeing how things were going, it would have been a good time to pull back to Dnipro or even Zaporozhye and then try to launch a counteroffensive. They didn't do that. They lost that opportunity. By now, this part was closed. This area here, in around Mariupol was closed, and they're grounding down Mariupol right now. Furthermore, on this side, they have blocked, seized Kherson, move on to Nikolaev. At Nikolaev, Nikolaev was blocked on three sides. It was blocked from the south, it was blocked from the east, and then blocked in the north here. Only the west was available, but the blocking in the north here prevented them from even also moving forces back up there. So now, around here, the Russian forces also took Voznesensk, and then they moved up here towards Enohoda. So that was phase one. And then during that time, the Russians destroyed all the Ukrainian. They destroyed Ukrainian weapons. They destroyed the international brigades. They destroyed the Ukrainian armor, and then they started going after the few depots hard. So now they had eliminated a lot of the possibility of the Ukrainians having the means, just the resources to be able to move men. You don't have weapons, you don't have fuel stores, and then you are blocked having to defend certain areas. Now, I heard, Scott Ritter is one of the guys that makes sense when talking about this stuff. And there's one place, though, disagree with him, where he said the Ukrainians are brave, are brave in their they're skillful. I agree with the bravery. They're brave. I don't agree with the skillful. I don't know that I will consider them skillful. They're just defending. Okay, they're defending staunchly, but when you're defending, you got the advantage because the other your enemy has to bring a force of 3 to 1 against you. Now, considering that you have the manpower advantage, I will expect you to do a better defense, go on an attack, offensive type of defense, counteroffensive and stuff like that to do a defense, not just to sit down and wait for yourself to be wait to sit in defense and not do anything. Especially to me, show the lack of abilities in the Kiev region. Knowing that there are 40,000 Russian men over there, and you got around 200,000 men in Kiev, the wise things would have been to launch large-scale counter-offensive. They did some tactical counter-offensives, scary like operations where it seemed like they were scared to move forward. I know for a fact around Gostomel, when those airborne forces took Gostomel, instead of the Ukrainian counterattack, what they call counterattack were really to sit back and launch artillery, as if the Russians going to be afraid because artillery is dropping there and run away. They launched artillery. That's how come the Antonov plane got destroyed, and now they're blaming the Russians, which makes no sense because the Russians were in the airfield. So if they're in the airfield, they're not going to launch artillery on themselves. So it was Ukrainian artillery that destroyed that. That's all they did. They did not move forces towards Gostomel to fight. If you got that type of advantage, why not launch counterattack to open up and free up Kiev? If they could have done that, make serious attempt of large-scale operational and counteroffensive, they could have freed Kiev from the pressure, and then maybe move some of those men back. But the Russian operation had done well to be able to hold those forces in Kiev. The Russians also held other forces in Kharkov, and they went ahead, destroyed a lot of the weapon stores and fuel storage. Now, before phase 1 ended, this was how the map was. So Russians had, Nikolaev here was surrounded on 3 sides, and then they pushed here to towards Pervomayesk and Voznesensk. They also were pushing in this direction, took over Enihoda, and they were close towards they were in the Zaporizhia region and close towards seizing the city of Zaporizhia. So that's where things were. But now that phase 1 is over, and the reason why phase 1 is over, understand why the Russians saying phase 1 is over. It makes sense why they withdraw instead of the nonsense talk that Kiev and the US is talking about. Oh, Russia couldn't seize Kiev, so the pull. It makes no sense. They had only 40,000 men. The Russians knew that they won't take Kiev with 40,000 men. If they wanted to take Kiev with 40,000 men, they would have probably brought. If they wanted to take Kiev, they would have probably brought in another 200,000 from both sides and crushed Kiev. And it would have been a disaster because the Russians would have surrounded Kiev, and painstakingly they would have gone and just destroyed Kiev. The U.S. and the Westerners, they know the Russian way of war. Russia is bringing in very little troops because They do not want to cause a lot of casualties. They do not want to cause a lot of damage. That's what's happening. In areas where they end up having to do that, where they end up having to fight brutal, that's because you had, like in Mariupol, that's because you had these Nazis fighting there, destroying the place. And that's one reason why they're not going to be nice to them if they surrender, finally. Right? So, what's going to happen now? Moving those forces here, that's freeing up 40,000 men. And then they freed up some people around the whole Chernigov area. And my understanding is that they probably they didn't release Chernigov per se from the block and from the blockade per se, as far as I've seen. I could be mistaken, but they free up some men there that are going to come back now for the main battle in the Donbas area, so around here. So remember, I said defeat in detail. So now, because they are a smaller force, they have secured the fact that Ukrainian forces cannot move to come and assist in the Donbas. The forces here, the 80,000 forces in the Donbas, they're on their own. They don't have communication. They don't have means for reinforcement, except maybe if there are forces in Dnipro who may want to come to their aid. And judging from how the Ukrainians seem to be acting like they're afraid to launch operational type counteroffensive, I don't think they're going to do that. It's not even smart at this time either. So those forces now going to the situation is such that those forces, those about 200,000 here, can't do nothing to help these guys here. The forces around Sumy still surrounded. They can't do anything. The guys in Kharkov, I don't even know how much they are, but even if they were significant, they can't move anywhere, because if they move, Kharkov will be seized. So they are placed on the hold as well. Now, they're going to come down here and they're going to try to destroy the guys here. They're not worried too much about people here, because they have destroyed a lot of Ukraine's weapons, their tanks, their armored vehicles, their artillery. They have destroyed a lot of it. That's why you see the Ukrainians now are asking the Germans for armor from all Soviet spares. They can't do much. If they try to bring those forces down, assuming they have a few, which they don't have, they have weapons which they don't have. Let's say they did have those things. You're trying to bring that down now. You'll be exposed, because remember, most of Ukraine is a steppe. Steppe meaning it's a flat area you can see for miles. In this area here, the Russians will just destroy and decimate whichever column. So these guys are on their own. Now, the Russians are going to come and defeat them in detail here. That's what's going to happen. The Russians are going to bring the rest of their forces, free up as much forces here to defeat these guys in details if they don't surrender. That would be bloody. Bloody against the Ukrainians. The Russians are not going to take much casualties because they're no longer in big cities. So I'm telling you, they're going to wipe these guys out. When they defeat them in details, there are a couple of choices I think the Russians might make. So now, remember, in Mariupol, when they finished solving this Mariupol stuff, there was 50,000 men here. 50,000 that the Russians put in Mariupol to seize Mariupol. When that Mariupol problem is seized, those men are going to also join the front in the Donbas. And they're going to wreck the rest of Ukrainian forces. And mind you, those are the 80,000 men there. They are Ukraine's most combat-ready force. So they're going to wreck them there. Now, defeating details. So once you defeat these people here, you got more troops freed out now. I think Kharkov will be left a little for later. They would then move those forces down year towards Odessa. They would seize Mykolaev first and push there, and then I think that's when that there's a amphibious ready force that kept the defenders of Odessa in check, so that they were worried about an amphibious assault. So they're oriented towards those guys. But when they defeat Nikolaev and start to push down towards Odessa from this side, those forces now have to split up to be able to defend Odessa. Assuming they still want to defend Odessa, the Marines that holding off the coast going to wreck those guys in Odessa. There's going to be a lot of picking off of the Ukrainian forces in Odessa. I think the Russians will seize that. Once they seize that, again, defeat in detail. You keep those other guys in pause while you go and deal with one group. You finish that group, then you take those forces, move them over to another area where problems there. You solve that problem, and you finish with that. You move over. Once they finish with that area, because I'm for certain that Ukraine, as we know it, is never going to have a coastline again. They're done with the Black Sea. It's not going. Russia not going to tolerate that nonsense again. So they're going to take that. Then all those forces going to move and take Kharkov. When they take Kharkov, if the Russians want to just be more of an just air holes, just pissed and want to do more, they're going to move on, probably take Sumy. Because what they're trying to do here is to make sure this new Ukraine that comes out have as small of a border with Russia as possible. So that if they try to do that nonsense NATO thing again, Russia can easily deal with them from those areas. So I think that's what's going to happen. And Ukraine's not going to have another they're not going to have a coastline. I think my original assessment that the Russians going to take, if they got that mad, they were going to take the most of the east and the south. I think that's still in play. And here's one final map. I think for sure these areas here, you see, going to be taken. I don't know. I think they would take Kharkov too, because what President Putin said was that since the Ukrainians wanted to decommunize Ukraine, he's going to show them what decommunization means, since the communists are the ones who actually gave Ukraine these territories from Kharkov all the way here. Those were actually part of Russia, but they added it to them since they wanted to appease the nationalists on the west. So they added these areas. What's going to do, what that's going to mean for Ukraine is that all of the industries, because a lot of the industries are in these areas. The Donbas was the breadbasket. Kharkov, another area, industrialized area. All of these areas are where the industries are. So you're going to be left with the center, some farmlands and stuff, and some cities, and Galicia. So this side, which Poland wants, Romania wants, and Poland and Romania wants one piece of those areas. Those are disputed areas too. So now, with Poland, will NATO allow Poland to go and peace out Ukraine? I don't know. If Ukraine don't take time and be careful, that's going to happen. But if Poland does come over to take over west part of Western Ukraine, you can bet your ass that Belarus will come over to take Volyn, the area every year. So Ukraine could be covered. I'm thinking Poland is not going to do that. I don't know for sure. I'm not in their minds, but I'm thinking they're not going to do that. Because how is that going to look, right? I'm thinking they're not going to do that. So Ukraine is going. The new Ukraine will be without these areas. Now, these areas will now get a chance for them to have consider themselves separate territories, separate countries, or all band together to form another entity. Keep making sure that Russia would keep Donetsk and Lugansk separate from them, but these areas here will form their own stuff. So Ukraine might end up looking like that. Now, a couple of things I wanted to touch on before I end. No, this is long. Hopefully, this was entertaining as well. The Ukrainians are claiming of some Russian and that Russia pull out in Kiev region, they committed war crimes. BS. Pure BS. First of all, they waited. The Russians pulled out on the 30th. They waited till the 3rd before they went and started finding bodies. Assuming those people were actually killed in that area, which I don't even believe. It's possible that the Ukrainian artillery, the way how they spread out on the street, it's possible that Ukrainian artillery did that. Because when the Russians were pulling out, so that they can act like they can make a scene to act as if they were attacking the Russians and the Russians was running away, they started artillery bombardment. And that artillery bombardment went into the areas that the Russians were. The Russians were not shooting on themselves. The Russians then returned fire back into the areas that the Ukrainians were in Irpin. Back into their areas. So if the deaths in the Russian areas, it's not the Russians hitting on themselves. Furthermore, these deaths look like some of them were executions. So there were things that were brought that the Ukrainians themselves did. I am very sure of that. Now, another thing to touch on. There are reports. So there were attempts for helicopters to come in Mariupol and pull out the Azov leaders. The first time they tried to come, they were shot down. And the second time, it was stated that 5 helicopters came to pick up people. And they landed 2. And when they pull out, they allowed them to land. When they pull out, 2 were shot at. 1 was hit immediately, blew up, killed everybody on board. The other one that was hit, it went for a while and then crashed. There were 2 survivors. The prisoners they picked up, those survivors that they picked up, they said they were transporting the wounded. Now, since then there have been rumors, unverified yet, on the Russian nets, that the people they actually were trying to pull out were actual Western advisors that were in Mariupol with the Azov guys. Now, the Azov guys are holding those guys hostage. So it makes sense that when those forces landed, because from one of the photos of the dead from the crash, it showed a guy whose hand was already bandaged. So it were wounded. So it's possible that when they came to pick up those, it is possibly true that the reason you got wounded in there is because the Azov refused to allow the Western instructors to leave. It is reported that Macron had called Putin to ask for them to be withdrawn. And the way the U.S. used it make Putin to be a bad guy that he's not, is very likely he was in agreement with this, because he did the same thing in Syria, in Aleppo, and allow Western special services to escape. But that will explain why those helicopters were shot by manpads, American-made manpads that the separatists had, rather than Russian anti-aircraft artillery, because it could have been that the Russians stood down to allow them to pick them up, but the separatists either did not know about that arrangement or they didn't want to agree to our arrangement. More than likely, they did not know, because more than likely, if Putin said they should not shoot it down, they probably would listen. They more than likely would listen. So that's the rumor. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's the rumor. Hey guys, please help me get this channel going. Hit like, because we want you hitting like when you view this stuff and you hit like. It helps to defeat the algorithms with YouTube suppressing my feeds. Also, subscribe to new users. Thank you. I've seen a lot of you guys watching now. Thank you. This is Sankara, and I hope you enjoy the video. I will try my best to get better at the around production thing. I am a newbie to this. Anyways, thank you for watching the Talking Guns session on the Up River Crawfish. Thank you.